Pringle, The Great Escape. I'm author CJ Peterson. Here's my co-host, author Michael Scott Clifton. We're pre-recording this, so if we don't flash your comments or answer your questions, please don't be offended, but we will get it sorted throughout the course of the week. We'll answer them as much as we can. So make sure to go ahead and leave your comments, and we'll handle them in a little bit. Mike, how was your week, and what you got going on next week?
It's been a great week. Today was a great day because today Pringle Prawn, my latest book, went live. In fact, we just had the book launch together along with 4 other fabulous authors. And I've been writing on, took roughly a year for me to write Pringle Prawn. And actually, I've had the idea for the book for a number of years now. And but I had other book projects that I had in mind and wanted to get to those first. And so completed The Conquest of the Veil this past year, and I've been working on Pringle Prawn ever since. And it's a great book. It's about fairies. It's about a young man who accidentally falls into an alternate world where he meets Pringle Prawn, a 6-inch high fairy, and they kind of befriend each other. And she helps him get back to his world, which is the setting is here in East Texas and Tyler. And unbeknownst to the main character, she follows him back, which leads to a number of very funny situations with Pringle and her adjustment to the non-magical world. And it's a great book. And currently it's an ebook and a paperback on Amazon. And if you hurry, you can go ahead and get a 99-cent ebook that will be going off. I may keep it on, this is a pre-recorded broadcast. I may keep it on through tomorrow, which would be the Wednesday date of our broadcast. So if you have 24 hours, if you want to get the ebook for 99 cents.
I'll make sure to grab it before the end of today.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is today, which is Wednesday, yes.
I love the tagline for it, though.
Move over, Tinkerbell. There's a new fairy in town. Yeah, that's. I'm not very good at taglines, but I accidentally stumbled into that one. So that one was mine. I did have a little help with the blurb, but I did come up with the tagline. And I'll be on the Fresh Ink Group podcast, and we'll be talking about Pringle Prawn. That will be Wednesday. That will be
tonight when this is airing.
That's right. It'll be at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and urge anyone that's interested to join in. And again, that's the Fresh Ink Group podcast. And I posted information on it on my website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So the link is there for you to go to if you would like to be listening to the podcast. So it's a great group of guys. Great publishing company. Looking forward to it. And then
actually going to be 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Time.
Yes, 7 o'clock Central Time, which will be 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Yeah, so that'll be 6 o'clock Central Standard Time where we live, and where they broadcasting from on the East Coast, it'll be Eastern Standard Time at 6 o'clock. I have one more Comic-Con this month, and actually it is the last day of September, which is Saturday, September 30th, and will run through October 1st on Sunday, and that is the Cowtown Comic-Con, and it will be held at the Will Rogers. I keep getting it's not the Will Rogers, not the Coliseum, not the arena, but it's not. They don't call it Convention Center. It's the indoor convention center, but it's not the Coliseum.
Like it.
We went there last year for the first time, and it was very bewildering because they had these 3 different large buildings.
Will Rogers Memorial Center.
There you go, Will Rogers Memorial Center, and we'll have a booth there, and I will hopefully have copies of Pringle Prawn. I'm supposed to get the shipment of those books before we have to leave to go to Fort Worth. So if you're in the Fort Worth area, look us up.
Awesome.
And that's that, CJ.
Awesome. I'm very cool. I'm excited for you. My launch, I was just on last week with the guys of the Fresh Ink group. Super fun. Make sure to tune it in tonight. As you're watching this, it will be again at 7 Central, 8 Eastern time. So make sure to catch that. I'm sure Mike's going to have the link on his profile, so you can find it there. Or if not, make sure if you miss it, you can always go to the Fresh Ink group on YouTube afterwards. A few days afterwards, they will go ahead and they post the episode up there as well. So make sure to check it out. Make sure to get Pringle Prawn through till tonight at 99 cents on ebook. Do not miss that. In the meantime, I'm in the process of a move. We are officially relocating to OKC. So Mike has graciously allowed us to record tonight so we can continue to move throughout the week. We are officially moving next week, so it's going to be kind of hairy for me in those few times. So appreciate your patience and understanding. We just finished. We had Anime Oklahoma the second week in September. We just got done with, what was that one? It was Brazoria Comic-Con in Lake Jackson, Texas. We're going to actually, speaking of Cowtown, we're going to be interviewing Chris Hayes on my other podcast, Magic Making Mischief. There's going to be a short feature on 11:30 next Thursday. He's going to talk a little bit more about Cowtown Comic-Con, so make sure to tune in and check that out. You can find that on my YouTube or on the Magic Making Mischief's Facebook group page. So make sure to check that out. You can learn more about Cowtown Comic-Con, where Mike's going to be. So kind of a hand-in-hand sort of deal. So today we're going to be talking about writing a series versus writing a standalone. Your thoughts, Mike?
Well, there's quite a bit of difference between writing a standalone and a series. And the main difference, which I think is pretty obvious, is when you write a standalone, you're dealing with a set of characters and a setting and a story, which is restricted to only one book. And it's a little bit easier to be able to keep up with your different characters and the setting when you're writing a standalone book. It's quite a different story when you're writing a series. And I have found at times it can be challenging because you have to keep up with all of the characters and thinking about how many books, like CJ, you have a book series of one that I know of that's what, 6 books?
There's one that's 5, one that's a trilogy, one that's 4, and then there are 2 standalones, but they all cross over storylines.
Okay.
So they're technically all interwoven.
So the more books you have in a series, the more characters you have to keep up with, the different plot lines you might have that array from the first book and spread out into the subsequent books.
But it also allows you to dive deeper into the characters.
It does.
Allows readers to become more invested in the characters and what happens to them, and that's why I actually like series is better.
I think especially for your minor characters as well, I think there's more of an impact on a series because you are able to spend a little bit more time on them than you ordinarily would with a standalone book. But I found that I've had to, like with the Conquest of the Veil, which recently completed last year, 4-book series, I had to have every book I wrote got subsequently harder. Now, this is me speaking personally, okay? Each book got a little bit harder to write, not because I was short of ideas, okay? Not because I had writer's block, but because I had to remember the previous characters, the things that had gone on to that point, and they had to all be consistent. The first book and second book were not that hard. The third book was harder, and the last book was the hardest one of all and I had to have the first, when I was reading the last book, I had the first 3 books beside me, almost like if you were a researcher and you had a compendium of books that you had to go back and refer to, you know, to get your information. And I had to have the previous 3 books there because occasionally I have to go, because I couldn't remember every single detail. I had to go back and refer to them almost like you would, again, a reference book. And it's a great series. I enjoyed doing it. But for me personally, and I can't speak for you, CJ, or other authors, I do feel like it is harder to write a series. And the more books in the series, I think the harder still.
What I did to solve that, because I had a little bit of that issue with like the trilogy, not as much for the 5-book series, as strange as it sounds, because I had all 5 books out within a year. So I just basically was funneling them through at the same time. And they all within a year were published.
Right.
What I did for the Sands of Time trilogy is I wrote all 3 prior to editing. I could still change little things here and there, but what it allowed me to do is to not lose the continuity of the storyline.
I see.
Or the pace of the series itself. I could still ratchet it up with each book because I remembered what was going on and it wasn't so much time in between it. This one that I'm currently working on, Castle Keep, is going to be the same idea. I'm going to actually write all 3 books, and then I'm going to slowly change them through the editor. But if something needs adjusted, it's not like I published the first book and then I realized, oh no, I should have done this in the first book, and first book's already published. You can't change it. Right. And so that solved that problem as well. And then I just released them with a couple months on the in-between, and that allowed me to have a little more flexibility in the storyline. But I do enjoy a series definitely more because, like I said before, you can dive into the characters. And some of the characters, the Team Angel ones were really probably the most difficult to write because there were so many. If you read the stories, you'll be like, oh, I remember that character. It was this person here. Okay, so I get a little bit more of the storyline for this particular character. But then there were some that were supposed to be minor characters that are like, oh, no, honey, I'm staying in here and I'm going to keep going. And it's like, oh, okay, it's taken over the story. Great. Not what I planned, but let's keep going. And it still, I like the flexibility of being a pantser and being able to do that. I'm not locked into any type of a storyline.
And it's funny you should mention that, because I've given it some thought. I actually think, and this is, again, I have no empirical evidence for this, but CJ, I actually think that planners have an advantage in writing series over pantsers. And I say that because planners, being planners, they have outlined everything. They have it all laid out. And it's like just connect the dots. And so it's harder to get off, to make a mistake that way. But also because the planner has outlined the chapters, has already established a story arc, I do think that it is easier for them to follow, again, connect the dots, follow the path that they've already pretty much constructed, and write. Whereas with a pantser, which we are both definitely pantsers, when you write by the seat of your pants and you have the flexibility, as you said, you could change, you can mold, you can do things differently, but you have more moving parts you have to keep up with. And since you don't have that outline in front of you, I do think it's a little bit harder to follow. And I think generally speaking, those who are planners have it a little bit easier in writing a series than do pantsers.
I think part of that depends on how your mind works. No, for mine, because I'm ADD and OCD, I've got like 20 windows going my brain at any particular point in time. So, I can have this going on and that going on and be watching a podcast on one and music playing on the other and still be able to keep track of all of it. That's how my brain works. It's like organized chaos. So for me, writing the Team Angel series books was a little bit more of a challenge, but I liked the challenge. I'm kind of one of those strange people that enjoy it. When it came to doing the Sands of Time trilogy, I had a lot of characters, but they were all shifting kind of together. So it was okay. Now that one, I had a little bit more notes than I normally do, but for the most part, I just kind of keep track of the characters on where they're going from book to book to book. And so I kind of might have an idea for later down the road, or I hit the part where, you know, they have to do one thing or the other, or I'm kind of questioning, okay, where do I go from here? I at least have my hubby and my daughter that I can kind of rely on and say, hey, what should I do here? What do you think would be a good option here? And they can kind of both give me different ideas, and it lets me kind of go, okay. And they've come up with some pretty good twists on their own. They can be a little bit more mean than I am, believe it or not. But it's fun. And I like the flexibility of that because, again, I'm not locked into this. When I published my first book was Strength from Within. I published it the first time. That's actually because it was my first book. I was going to let it slide, but the characters, part of them show up again in the Christmas Angels and in the last book of the Divine Legacy series, Chain Reaction. And so I had to keep somewhat of the storyline intact when I rewrote it. And I did a completely different viewpoint. I cleaned up a lot of storylines. I twisted things here and there, but I had to keep certain continuity in it because those characters came up later. To me, that was more frustrating to write than just being able to sit down and write the series. The best way I can describe it is if you have this huge canvas in front of you, depending on if it's a series or a standalone, depends on the size of the canvas you have. So the planners will go through and just pencil the whole thing. And you just like basically do like a paint by numbers, right?
Right.
Picture. Meanwhile, the pantser, at least to me, I've got a vision of what I want it to be, and I start doing it. Now, if further down the line I make a mistake, I can still use that and adjust it and tweak and go, okay, well, let's just change it and we'll make it do this instead. And it still might look a little bit abstract, but it's still a beautiful picture regardless. Either way you look at it, whether it's the paint by numbers version with the planners or whether it's the abstract version with the pantsers, it's still a beautiful work of art regardless. It just depends on how big that work of art is regarding the size, whether it's a standalone or whether it's a series.
Well, I think a comment you made earlier, I kind of want to go back that just a little bit about giving characters greater depth. And I do think that when you write a standalone novels, you basically have a finite number of word count and pages in order to, to lay everything out, to define your characters, all of that. You have a little bit more, well, depending on the length of your series, you have more freedom to give more depth to your characters, both major and minor. And I think we mentioned earlier your minor characters, who often, particularly with pantsers like ourselves, they may actually at some point turn into major characters, transform from minor to major, or you may have a spin-off of your series where the minor characters themselves are now the major characters of a new series. But I do think that's an important point to be made, that you do have the luxury of going deeper and again giving more depth to all of your characters, but particularly your major and your minor characters, and especially your minor characters.
Definitely. It allows the story to expand more and allows you to dive more into that whole show and don't tell situation.
Yes.
Because I find it harder to write a standalone because I have to fit this whole huge story that's in my head in this little bitty book. And I'm like, I want the whole thing to show, and I want it to be pretty, and I want it to, just allow it to expand in the reader's mind. And I have a hard time doing that in a standalone. I feel kind of locked in. I do have Chain Reaction as a standalone. I can take that later to a series. That's a thing I can do, and that's a thing I may actually do. I can take. No, I really can't. Tested by Fire is a definite standalone. It's not going anywhere. And same thing with Strength from Within. Those two have pretty much run their course. They're good books. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
Stories. It's just I don't have a whole lot of room for expansion. Whereas even with the Sands of Time trilogy, I left that open that I can go deeper into each one of the character groups.
Right. Well, speaking in general terms, and that's what we've been talking about so far. Standalone novels, and I'm speaking in a general sense again, they tend to move faster because you're having to condense a story into a single book. I do think that one of the drawbacks, one of the dangers of series books is that sometimes the author gets a little word crazy, and you start creating books that are 3, 4, 5, 600 pages or more in length, 100, 150, 200,000 or more word count, and the story doesn't move fast, and it's slowed down, and there's just a ton of extraneous writing that you would not do in a standalone novel because of the parameters you're forced to work with a standalone novel. I think the danger in a series is that you can go a little bit. We mentioned you can go in more depth in terms of creating, the describing to the reader your characters, major and minor. But you can also go to that well too deep and too often, and your writing starts to slow down. And of course, the kiss of death in any kind of book, I don't care what the genre, is when the reader starts to get bored.
Yeah. You don't want to do that. Again, the ADD portion of me doesn't let me do that. If I'm bored, I toss that scene. But not everybody understands that. Not everybody follows that. It's kind of like the difference between your 1,000,000 word count book that we've talked about multiple times versus your 4 books that came out of that 1,000,000 words. And I highly doubt that all 4 of those books are going to total 1,000,000 words.
But no. Well, I'll tell you, my hat is off to everyone that has read all 13 books of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. My hat is off to everyone that's read every one of Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth series. And I could go on and on. And how do I put this? Okay, for every reader, and I'm speaking in a general sense, and I have no empirical data to back this up. So this is my opinion. But I would bet you that for every reader of this massive 8-inch tome, there's 50 to 100 when you write the fast-moving standalone novel or the fast-moving series novels that don't get bogged down in minutia and taking a paragraph to say what you could have said in one sentence, taking a paragraph to say a page to say what you could have said in one paragraph.
One good exercise that I learned from writing the first one I did is write yourself some short stories. Write the story. See if you can put a full story in 3,500 to 7,500 words, because that's going to teach you to say more with less. It'll teach you to get rid of a lot of that extraneous. But you're also dealing with an ADD society now. It's not just me as ADD. It's society as a whole, because it's that instant gratification. So it's that continuous social media, YouTube's, TikTok, all of the stuff that's just boom, it's right there at your fingertips. And because of that, you cannot have any stories that are slow or that are long or that are drawn out, because you're going to lose your reader. And that's something you do not want to do.
And I do think that there's positive and negatives to everything. And I do think when I say, okay, the gigantic 8-inch book, is really way too much for a normal reader to be able to go through. But by the same token, go back what you were saying, CJ, I do think there's a reverse effect today that I don't really like either. And that is that we do have impatient readers. And it makes it difficult for a good writer, a good author, to be as descriptive as they would like to be, because the reader loses interest if you're not rocking along 100 miles an hour. And it's just a shame we don't have that balance. And there's still some writers that are like that, and there's still readers that like a good description, but at the same time, don't want their time wasted by repeating the same word or defining the same word in half different ways. And so I do think that good description is important. And I think it's a shame that what you said, that we do have a very impatient world that we live in, and it's particularly among young people, but even elderly folks, are getting that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that the author had the first 5 pages to get a hold of a reader, and anymore it's the first paragraph or 2. If they're not caught in that first paragraph or 2, then you're going to lose them.
Yep. Close the book. Out the door. Yep, you're right. Absolutely right.
You've got to, as an author, nail the hook. If you don't, you're going to lose them, and they're gone.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, we have a few minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I just think that for many authors, I would assume that a series will be a little bit more difficult to write, simply because you have more moving parts that you have to keep up with, which, again, with pantsers and planners, a whole different world. Planners probably roll through it without a miss. Pantsers, maybe, like myself, maybe not you, CJ, but pantsers like myself, takes us a little bit longer because we have to, refresh our memories, so to speak, as we go along. But I think that's the price you pay to beat a pantser. But it also, as we've talked about many times before, it does allow you to have the flexibility to go in any direction you want to go in the course of either your single book or your book series.
But basically, it just depends on what story you want to tell. Is there, like with Strength from Within and Tested by Fire, is this a one story thing, or is this something maybe that you can expound on because your characters have developed in such a way that it actually maybe can have another adventure or two in another book?
Yeah.
You never know. It all just depends on how you want to do it. So series versus standalone, there's lots of things to take into consideration. Planner, pantser, number of characters, actual storyline. Is this one that needs to be just a book, or is this one that needs to be a series? What are your characters telling you that it needs to be? Pay attention to that. There's a lot of things you got to look at. But there is no right answer. To be honest, there really isn't. It's just, what is the character telling you? Like Trusted by Fire told me it's just one. That's all she was. She was a one book. Meanwhile, this Castle Keep one, from the get-go, already has it as a trilogy in my mind. It's already there. That's what it is. That's what it's going to be. And a lot of times I'll figure that out within the first chapter, whether it's going to be a standalone or a series.
Yeah. I think I think especially if you've been writing for any length of time, you either know ahead of time or shortly after you start a book. And again, particularly with pantsers, where you just go where the flow takes you. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Again, this is pre-recorded. If you have questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll catch them later. Stay tuned for next week on September 27th. We'll be talking about writing a good hero, identify and understanding the hero. Make it a good one. Make it a good one. In the meantime, find a really good book to read. I have my Tested by Fire that launched on September 5th. Mike has his Pringle Prawn that just launched yesterday. So there's a couple to start off with right away. Don't miss Mike's interview tonight with the guys of the Fresh Ink group. They are a fun group. Don't miss that. Until